For the love of Chicago, my name is Tom Barnes in the Woodlawn neighborhood right at Cottage Grove and 63rd Street. And this is the very heart of the Woodlawn community area. 63rd Street at one time had jazz clubs up and down this street. It was famous for that. In the 60s, 80,000 people called Woodlawn home. And there is so much other history we're going to get into a little bit with Peter Alter. In fact, one of those things that is historic is Daley's restaurant right there. It used to be in this space right here. They jumped across the street like 2019. I'm going to talk to owner Mike about that, a landscape architect about the beautiful Jackson Park and Midway Plaisance. But first, Peter Alter, give me a little bit more history that is the Woodlawn community area.
Like so many other community areas in Chicago, has such an interesting history. People look at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition as having a direct impact on it. It's very close. It has some of the University of Chicago campus on it. Chicago Theological Seminary is there. Well-known high schools like Hyde Park and Mount Carmel are there. Lorraine Hansberry, the super famous playwright who wrote Raisin in the Sun, is from there.
So right now you're looking at the Lorraine Hansberry house, built in 1909 at 6140 Rhodes Avenue. Her father, Carl Hansberry, bought this house back in the 1930s. Lorraine and her family lived here, and much of what you know as Raisin in the Sun comes from her roots starting here in the Woodlawn neighborhood. The Woodlawn neighborhood gem that is the Lorraine Hansberry house. It's 6140 South Rhodes.
Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Mobley Till, had a home there. There's lots of history from the World's Fair to racial desegregation to African American history that's there.
Clearly lots of history here in the Woodlawn neighborhood. So Peter, tell me exactly, where does Woodlawn sit with the rest of the city?
If you think about Midway Plaisance, so that's that long stretch of green that has in the winter, like the ice skating rink.
Look at that beautiful architecture just beyond the trees. That is the Hyde Park neighborhood. I'm standing here in the Midway Plaisance, and this is the area of land that separates Woodlawn from Hyde Park. The Plaisance connects Jackson Park to my east to Washington Park to my west, and you notice the Plaisance is sunken down a little bit. That's because it was supposed to be a canal years and years ago, then used for the World's Fair. And that spot right there where the ice rink is, there is significance to that because the first ever Ferris wheel ever designed in the entire world stood right there for the World's Fair of 1893. And beyond that, you see the Obama Presidential Center in Jackson Park. This is Midway Plaisance.
That's on the north side. You have Oakwood Cemetery kind of on the south side, and then there's some railroad tracks. Stony Island on the east and railroad tracks on the west.
Woodlawn holds an important place in Chicago history, especially when it comes to civil rights activism. Peter?
Post-World War II civil rights activism in the 50s and 60s, especially starting and later, starting with TWO, the Woodlawn organization. One of the co-founders was Bishop Arthur Brazier, and they really, that organization really wanted to address racial inequity, housing inequity, employment inequity in a community like Woodlawn, which went back to like the 1920s and 30s.
With the Obama Center shining a light on the Woodlawn community, Peter, I want to know what else is going on in Woodlawn today?
Woodlawn today, it's has all of these wonderful organizations in it that we've already talked about, and it's also in kind of an upswing in honoring and commemorating and documenting like all of this great history from the World's Columbian Exposition, for example, to Emmett Till and his mom.
Another historical spot in Woodlawn sits at 6427 South St. Lawrence Avenue, just a few blocks from the Cottage Grove and 63rd Street Green Line station is Emmett Till's home. Emmett Till murdered in Mississippi in 1955. This is the home he grew up in. It is being preserved now as a museum and a theater to continue his legacy along with his mother's legacy for generations to come, and his final resting spot at Burr Oak Cemetery south of Woodlawn. On the list of things you probably didn't know about the Woodlawn community, you probably didn't know that the Green Line runs right down 63rd Street.
So, I mean, the Green Line, like the Red Line, was a historically long existing train line. There was also, for the World's Columbian Exposition, there was a train going, basically what we would call CTA, going from the Loop down to Hyde Park and Woodlawn. So there has been historically access, especially by elevated trains, to that part of the South Side.
So in my time doing this video in the Woodlawn neighborhood, one of the things I noticed was the architecture. So many different kinds of architecture. You're talking the Obama Center here in Jackson Park, which is on the east end of Woodlawn. And then just to the north, you have the Museum of Science and Industry, among many other places here in Woodlawn.
So yeah, the architecture there, Woodlawn, like Washington Park, one of the other neighborhoods that we've talked about, had this big building boom in the 20s, post-World War II.
Another fun fact of Woodlawn is it is a heck of a spot to catch a morning sunrise on Chicago's South Side. I got here just a little after the sunrise, but either way, look at this view. It's stunning. And if you look to the north, that is Hyde Park, Promontory Point, downtown, up that way. Just beautiful. You can see Museum of Science and Industry, that is Lakeshore Drive, and then the 63rd Street Beach. This beach is one of the most underrated spots in Chicago. It is stunning. You're looking at the 63rd Street Beach Pavilion, built in 1919 and completed in 1919. It used to have two sides for men and women, and now, it's open to everybody. But this is a spot where you can rent boats, and Reggie's on the Lake, which we've done a jumpstart segment, is right there, where you have a little slice of paradise right here in Chicago's South Side. This truly is a remarkable spot to come and enjoy. One of the most underrated beaches in Chicago, right here in Woodlawn.
So there's a lot of really nice 2 and 3 flats. There's some single family homes. There's some wide boulevards. There's trees. There's a lot of sort of architecture, even going back to, say, the 1890s, with some gray stones that are in the community as well.
So now we're on the very southwest edge of the Woodlawn neighborhood. Look at these buildings, very unique, very distinctive. Hugh Hefner lived in a building that looked just like this, and this is where he produced the first issue of Playboy magazine in December of 1953 at his kitchen table of his apartment he shared with his wife, Millie, at 6052 South Harper. You might be wondering, why am I not showing 6052 South Harper? Well, that's why. It is no longer here. It has been moved for a parking lot, but that's what the buildings used to look like either way. Fun fact. Just down the street from the Obama Center opening up in June, 63rd Street was one of the major corridors of the Woodlawn community, and Daley's has been on that street and a part of the fabric of this neighborhood for over 100 years. They have a new spot right at 63rd in Cottage Grove. I'm gonna go inside now to talk to the owners about the history of this wonderful spot here in Woodlawn. Let's go inside. So you see that space there, that is the southeast side of Cottage Grove at 63rd. That is the original spot of Daley's Restaurant. Here we are on the other side with the owner, Mike. Mike, how you doing, man?
Good, good. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Give me your fancy title. I know you're owner, but give me your full name and all the good stuff.
Yeah, my name is Mike Zara. I'm the owner of Daley's Restaurant.
That's something, man, because Daley's, as it says on your shirt, been around since 1892. That predates the World's Columbian Exposition. What's your story? How have you been a part of this? I imagine some family ties.
You're absolutely correct. It's been in my family since 1918. Originally, it was opened in 1892 by Irish iron worker named John Daley. And they were building the elevated line over here in Chicago, and he saw a need for a food facility. So he decided to open a restaurant, and he named it after himself, Daley's Restaurant.
Why not, right?
My great uncle worked for him as a waiter, and his friend Paul was a cook. And in 1918, John Daley decided to sell, and he asked my great uncle and his friend if they wanted to buy, and of course they agreed. They jumped at the opportunity, and it's been in my family ever since.
And when you say building the elevated line, you're referring to that elevated line that's still there to this day. That's 63rd Street. Cottage Grove is the intersection, but that is synonymous with Woodlawn, that L running right down 63rd Street. And I imagine you've heard stories about what Woodlawn was like back in the day on 63rd Street, because we're like at the center of Woodlawn in this intersection.
I've heard many stories from my uncle, from customers, that it was just booming around here. Jazz clubs, nightlife, restaurants, bars. Muhammad Ali used to train down the street at Johnny Coulan's gym on 63rd at University.
Come on.
Across the street from my grandfather's restaurant. He used to come and eat there every day. So there's a lot of history around this area that a lot of people don't know about, but I mean, you could see from photos, or you could do research and just see how lively this area was back in the day.
When people come to Woodlawn, they come to Daley's, and they've been doing it for generations. Like, what gives them that feeling of community here?
Well, I guess people just gravitate towards this restaurant. It's a family-oriented atmosphere. You know, we're perfect for Sunday lunch or dinner after church. We're here to serve the community every day of the year.
There's a lot history all over the place on the walls. In particular, one I saw when you were walking me through the space. Can you explain that one?
So in 1920, the city of Chicago switched over from gas lights, street lights, to electric. And it was a big deal, obviously. You know, you have consistent lighting, you know, without having to refill the canister, you know, to get light. And they had a parade for it. And luckily I have a picture of it with my great uncle in it and a couple of his co-workers. They had a Daley's restaurant banner on the side of the car, so it's pretty cool to see that.
The food, I imagine, has been one of the many reasons why people come in here. What are the food options here when they come in?
We have a full breakfast menu, lunch and dinner menu, although we open at 7 a.m., but we close at 5 p.m. Dinner, we have like baked chicken, macaroni and cheese, collard greens, black-eyed peas. We have oven-baked turkey wings with drumstick combination plate with cornbread, homemade cornbread dressing. For breakfast, we have homemade biscuits. We make them every morning. Those are very popular. We got skillets, scramblers, omelets, all your basic stuff. We have about 4 different steaks on our menu, which a lot of places don't have anymore.
4 different steaks?
Yeah, so we have T-bone steak, ribeye steak, butt steak, and a chop steak on the menu. A lot of places you go to, like breakfast places or whatnot, they might have 1, we got 4. It's my home. This is my home. It means everything to me. And to be able to work with a lot of my co-workers for so many years, you know, we're like a family over here, you know, and we run it like that. And we're just grateful to be a part of it.
Okay, I've made my way to the northern edge of the Woodlawn neighborhood, and you're looking at the western edge of the Midway Plaisance. That is the fountain of time that connects both the Midway Plaisance to Washington Park. And just to the south, you see 60th Street. I'm gonna get to that in one second, but I wanted to show you something really fun here. This is Cottage Grove Avenue. Earlier, I was down at 63rd Street at the heart of Woodlawn. I'm up a little bit north because I wanted to show you the space here, but it really separates both east and west Woodlawn. A lot of people don't know that there's an east and west Woodlawn, but there is, and some folks will even argue that the very northeast end of Park Manor is in this area as well. Now you're looking at the Washington Park subdivision. That is this area between Cottage Grove all the way down to King Drive, the very northwest corner of the Woodlawn neighborhood. But believe it or not, back in 1884, the Washington Park racetrack was here. And it was a phenomenal racetrack, 1884 to 1905. And they had more than just horse racing here. They had electric car racing, believe it or not. And this was one of the first sites ever where in 1905, a gas-powered car, because there was more electric than there were gas, even way back in 1905, the first time an electric car beat a gas-powered car. But they closed it down. They built this subdivision that still stands today all the way to King Drive. And I gotta tell you, some really great history is that the stables from the old racetrack, yeah, they're at the DuSable Museum in Washington Park. You can still see them today. This racetrack actually closed in 05, reopened in Homewood, and went all the way to 1977. A little slice of the northwest corner of Woodlawn. So you're looking at a Burnham design bridge in Jackson Park, which happens to be in the Woodlawn neighborhood. And with the Obama Center opening up in this very park, I thought, you know what? Let's get a little education about what the history of Jackson Park is. I mean, look at this stunning spot here in Jackson Park. I brought an expert along. This is my friend, Julia. Julia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So Julia, you have a big fancy title. You used to work with the Park District for over 20 years. Give me your title, and you are a historian as well.
I'm retired from the Chicago Park District.
Right.
I was the Park District's historian and preservationist, and now I'm a consulting historian in Chicago.
Why is this such a a treasure for Chicago. And that bridge, there's a fun story with that bridge that you got to get into.
Okay, absolutely. Well, first of all, Jackson Park is really one of the most significant places in Chicago. It's a beautiful landscape designed by a very famous landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted. And so it's almost like the Central Park of Chicago. That's the same.
Right, because he
design.
did that. Right?
Absolutely. And he gave us, in our region, he also designed the town of Riverside, which is extraordinary. In Chicago, Frederick Law Olmsted designed one large park that we now think of as three sort of separate landscapes: Jackson Park, Washington Park, and the Midway Plaisance. So then the next thing that happens is Chicago gets selected as the site of the World's Columbian Exposition. Everybody wanted it in their neighborhood.
Of course.
And there were some major civic leaders on the south side who really felt that Jackson Park was the best place for the fair. So Frederick Law Olmsted got hired then to come back to Chicago and do a second plan. And this time it was actually for the fair, which was a temporary experience. Many people know it lasted 6 months, and it had lots of beautiful classically designed buildings like this one, but all made out of staff, which was basically a type of plaster.
All right, so go back in time with me, if you will. Here we are at 63rd in Cottage Grove. Folks used to get off of that train stop right here, and they would come to places that look like this entire neighborhood filled of buildings like this. Because you're talking, we are just a few blocks away from the Chicago World's Fair of 1893 happening down in Jackson Park. It opened up in 1915. It's called the Strand. It was an extended stay kind of apartment, also a luxurious hotel. One of the very few remnants left of what this neighborhood used to look like back in its heyday.
Essentially what happens is that Burnham and Olmsted, and they each had a partner, the four designers worked very closely together, coming up with this scheme. It also influenced a whole new movement of American design called the City Beautiful movement. So it kind of harkens back to ancient Greece and Rome, and that you'd have these very beautiful classical buildings, and that would create kind of outdoor courtyards and spaces, the way they kind of related to one another, and they were quite monumental. And yes, they were made out, most of them were made out of this type of temporary white plaster. They were whitewashed, so that's why it was called the White City. Why do we end up with just the one building? Well, by the time, really very early on, from when they opened the fair, which was in the late spring of 1893, Burnham and some others were already bemoaning the idea that the whole thing would be razed within a couple of years. They realized that the magnitude of this, it really put Chicago on the map for the world. And as I said, it influenced design and architecture and landscape architecture, but also it influenced lots of other things because of all the really cool products and foods and all the other, innovations that people could see in the exhibits of the fair. So it was a really important experience for Chicago. And so they really quickly began thinking, we want something permanent. Well, out of all the buildings that they might have saved, why did they pick this one? Because it was the Fine Arts Palace, and they had to build a fire vaulted interior. So it had a more permanent interior structure than the other buildings. The other ones were a little bit more like a movie set, because they knew they didn't really have to be heated or, but this one, they had to worry about, controlling the temperature, having good fireproofing, because some really famous people like Bertha Palmer, well-to-do people that had important art collections, as well as museums from all over the world, were lending, their artworks to be shown here.
And also Bertha Palmer, didn't she also have somebody come up with the brownie for said World's Fair?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and she was on the Ladies Board of Commissioners, and there was also a women's exhibit. She was involved with that, and so I think a lot of the leading Chicagoans all kind of left a their own sort of stamp of contributing to the history.
And now it's the anchor of one of the anchors of Jackson Park, but there's so much other history in this park. There's a golf course, there's a harbor, there's even a beach, that goes on the shores of Lake Michigan. You gave me a list and I ran through a bunch of them. Run down the list of some of the highlights that is Jackson Park.
I think this park has some of the most beautiful landscapes that I've ever seen. I think most people in Chicago know that it has a Japanese garden. And it's had this Japanese garden for many, many years. There was a really interesting Japanese pavilion during the time of the fair. There was just a little garden associated with it. But there were a lot of garden installations on the Wooded Island at that time. And then after the fair, it was really at the time of Chicago's second World's Fair in 1933 and 34 that people were trying to think of what to do with all this beautiful landscape material that was left over from that fair. And there was a beautiful Japanese garden out on the northerly island. Oh. They said, well, we don't want to throw away all of these great, cherry trees. And so they just moved it all and made it was like in-house Chicago Park District project. Moved the garden, I shouldn't say they moved it. They redesigned and made a whole new garden, but they were able to repurpose by transplanting a lot of the plant material that had been there. And it's beautiful. It's a really interesting space, the Wooded Island. Olmsted, he was very concerned about the idea of having this Japanese pavilion because he didn't want any buildings on the island. He wanted it to be It
was supposed to be a place of solitude, right?
Exactly. He thought that people spending a day with these thousands of exhibits, these humongous, giant, beautiful buildings, all housed, so many different things.
All along the outside of the Wooded Island, right? Like they kind of.
Well, there was a court of honor, and so that was you had the Wooded Island, and it at the south end of the Wooded Island, the lagoon, and the Wooded Island in his original plan had been a peninsula. So he carved that into made it, instead of a peninsula, it was very similar because it had these great oak trees that he wanted to preserve, made it into a peninsula, and then at the south end, which we don't really have anymore, it would flow into this sort of beautiful, very formal waterway that was called the Court of Honor. The Statue of the Republic, which we affectionately called the Golden Lady, who's kind of like Chicago's answer to, the Statue of Liberty, had her back to Lake Michigan, and then she was facing that Court of Honor.
So just steps away from Jackson Park Golf Course, you have this beautiful commemorative statue that is the Statue of the Republic. And the Statue of the Republic, a huge part of what made the World's Fair of 1893 so grand and gilded. It was absolutely stunning. And the original one, much, much, much bigger than this. But the Statue of the Republic is a gilded bronze sculpture by Daniel Chester, based by Henry Bacon, originally dedicated in 1918 to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the 1893 World's Fair. It was restored in 1992 by the Chicago Park District, rededicated by Mayor Richard Daley to initiate a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. So a pretty cool spot here, just at the doorstep of the Jackson Park Golf Course. You also have other little pieces of history throughout the park, like the Burnham designed bathroom that's just been restored, and then also another Burnham-like rest area that's kind of by the golf course.
He married John Sherman's daughter. John Sherman was the founder of the Stockyards, and so he was just this struggling young architect who he started a partnership with John Wellborn Root, and here's these two young guys. This was a time, it was probably sometime in the 1870s, so after the fire, a lot of young architects knew there would be opportunities to rebuild the city. So Chicago was a great place to try to establish yourself. And they had both worked in the same firm, and they decided, let's try to, start our own firm. And they had no money. They barely could afford the pencils that they needed to do their drawings. But somebody recommended them to John Sherman and said, these two young guys are really talented. So they get this commission to do a fancy mansion. I think it was going to be on Prairie Avenue in Chicago. It doesn't exist anymore. But so every time when it was time for Burnham to kind of show the sketches to the family, when he'd ring on the doorbell, the 18 or 19-year-old daughter, Margaret, would answer the door. They fell in love. And so do you think that one of the richest guys in Chicago was going to let his daughter be married to a struggling architect?
No, I don't think
Not
so.
exactly. And so he was on, they lived on the South Side. He was on the board of commissioners for the South Park Commission. And so, it's a little different than how things are done, but connections have always been important. And, he said that he'd like to have the South Park Commission have these young architects do some work. So the really modest early projects that they did, like their earliest projects, were this bridge, which later becomes known as the Clarence Darrow Bridge. But it's from, they designed it in 1880. So this is really early.
Really early, yeah.
And then there's a little bathroom that was a ladies' comfort station because they didn't bother making one for men back then. Also with the beautiful limestone, and it was recently restored. And that also is from maybe 1881 or 83 or, that early period. It's got just the most incredible views. Some of these waterways are stocked with fish, so you see, fishermen. And
the Daniel Burnham building, though, all the way down by the golf course.
So that was a little bit kind of later in the story, and by that point, Olmsted. Remember, we've got sort of the Olmsted from the East Coast, and then we've got Burnham and Root from Chicago. Olmsted's sons had now kind of taken over the family business, and they do the plan for the University of Chicago, but they also are asked, and this is in about 1903 to 05, to come up with a whole new plan for a whole new type of park, because as tens of thousands of immigrants were, settling into the south side of the city, and neighborhoods were becoming quite dense. They wanted to make sure that the parks could fulfill the needs of the neighbors, the people who lived around them. And so they realized that these parks that were, largely bridges and water and trees and lawn, that there could be more to, provide services to the community. And so the Olmsted brothers get hired at that point to design a whole system of new parks for the South Side. And at this point, recreation's becoming a little, more of a kind of big thing. So at that point, they start designing field houses where there's some like indoor gyms and things like that. Roughly around that same time, I think the earliest part of the golf course was from 1899. So it does sort of represent this arc of active recreation that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And so the golf course, I think, went at one point from a 9-hole to 18-hole. And so they realized if people are going to be playing a game and cover that much space, that we need some restrooms and we need some shade and just a little shelter. And so the design of it is very similar to a lot of the field houses that Burnham was building in the Olmsted Brothers designed park. So there was a lot of collaboration between these firms. It's this moment, that's 1895, leading up to the turn of the century. That's when people start wanting a few more kinds of recreational opportunities. So that's when their plan doesn't include the golf course, but it included a great play field. And so part of what they put in as a play field becomes the golf course. And even today, we still have ball fields over there as well, and running track. And there were actually separate ones in their plan for men and women. So we call that an outdoor gymnasium. And so this is one of the first times that the Olmsted firm had included this element, and then they end up, they're a national firm. They're working on parks in cities all over the country. Plus they come back to Chicago and do it. So that area of the park, and there's still kind of a running track in front of the high school.
Yeah, there is.
Park High School. And so, there were two of them.
I see.
And then the Midway Plaisance came all the way to the water because Olmsted's idea was that water would flow down the Midway.
And you can see those beautiful stone bridges off in the distance when you're in the garden looking east.
Oh yeah, that's the Music Court Bridge.
Yeah.
Some of this all dates back to after the fair, right after the fair.
But all part of Jackson Park's history.
Oh yeah. And I mean, some of the most beautiful aspects of the fair were the design right after the fair. Like that's a lot of really what we have in the
Yeah,
park
and now
today.
you have cherry blossoms that overlook this lagoon that people come out here in the spring, the Obama Center opening up, and it goes all the way down to 67th Street, I believe, as far as the footprint of Jackson Park, and then all the way to the lakefront, and as far east as, far west as
The Midway.
the Midway. Yeah, thank you.
It's just different now because
Yeah, it is, but
it looks a little different on that edge, but it's still really worth kind of walking along the Midway. And then, I mean, the University of Chicago is beautiful too. So this whole, there's a lot to discover.
And it used to be called, or it was supposed to originally be called the South Park?
It was actually called the South
that?
Park. It was called South Park. And if you look at the original plan, it was the Eastern Division, the Western Division,
Midway.
and the Midway Plaisance.
Sure. The World's Fair of 1893, one of the most historic events ever to take place in Chicago. There's just not much left of it except for what is in Jackson Park. Of course, you have the Museum of Science and Industry, and then you have the wooded island. Look at this space here. This used to be nothing but marshland. This water was not here. Frederick Olmsted, who designed Central Park in New York City, was tasked to design this. He had $16 million to make something out of nothing, and he did. Along the edge there, the bank of the lagoon, you would have over 200 buildings that would make up the World's Fair. And inside here was the respite. And you also have the Osaka Garden that lies within the wooded island. Today, there are over 250 types of birds. Bird watchers come from near and far to enjoy this space. And if you're a big person who wants to identify trees, they have this handy map that you can see right along the walking route here, the Wooded Island Tree Identification. And they also have this other fancy map here that explains a little bit of what goes on at the World's Fair back in the day. But behind me, though, that is this true star of the show for 2026 and beyond, adding to the legacy that is Jackson Park. You have the Obama Presidential Center located right here on the western edge of the park itself. It is 19.3 acres of campus, and it includes a world-class museum, Chicago Public Library, Community Athletic Center with a, of course, NBA-sized basketball court, recording studio, sledding hill, outdoor community gardens. $30 will get you in. There's discounts for military, all right here in this historic space that is Jackson Park. And when I mean truly historic, I really do. This lagoon here was designed to have boats go all the way through to Lake Michigan. Out that way, you can see one of the beautiful bridges that are still here from the time that it was created. And up this way here, you see Museum and Science and Industry through those woods. Truly a lot of history right here in Woodlawn.